So let me build on these early tweets and offer very briefly a context, an evolutionary context for today, and then invite Anne and Jeff and Grace. So for this, I will ask you to travel with me, with your minds, some 3,000 years back, perhaps a little more, just to a time a little after the collapse of what was known later as the Bronze Age, when the 9 civilizations that prospered during the Bronze Age collapsed. And we now come through the Axial Revolution and whooshing through time that we know of from biblical stories. And we come through the ancient Greek culture when similar important religious and philosophical arisings are happening over a good 1,000 or 2,000 years, both in the East and in the West. And in the West, we come through the time of the Roman Empire and glide through the time of the birth of Christ and proceed into the early Middle Ages. And I want you to imagine that through this entire whooshing through time, the majority of the people living at that time, they experience life a little bit different to the way we experience life today. Because consciousness is always in part a product of the topography of our experiences and the environment. And naturally, they are operating in a different environment. And we are particularly interested in the fact that through the arc of time, they mostly, the majority of people, they experience life through what we can call a group consciousness or tribal consciousness. Sure, there are renowned, big, larger than life names that etch themselves on history, the annals of time. But for the majority of people, they experience life through the group experience, by which we mean that if you are a soldier in the Roman army and you're wounded, it's not that you don't experience pain in a very personal way. It's that even that experience of pain for you, and or if you're a wife of a wounded soldier, while you experience it in a personal way, the overarching nature of the experience is clothed and contexted inside the group, the tribal story. Even though you could say the seeding of the individuation project can be traced all the way back to Socrates and Plato and so on. In the large scale of things, the individuation project is still latent. And now we come through the 11th and the 12th and the 13th centuries, and the early institutions of knowledge begin to appear. Oxford and Cambridge and the Sorbonne, and we move through time and we come through a very important transition point with the invention of the printing press, the first internet revolution. And as we proceed through the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment, the individuation project really gets underway on the two sides of the street, on the search for truth and search for understanding side, where the scientific revolution arises, and on the other side of the street, where the new forms, mediums of expression and art begin to appear, and individual expression increasingly becomes part of the human story. And as we quickly whooshing through time to the 18th and the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution, and yes, every advance creates its release and also its shadow element, which is part of a broader story for another time. But as we come through the 19th century, teachers of the time intuit and see that we are about to enter or are entering a new age. And there is a third nature along the search for truth and knowledge and the search for expression. There is now the entrepreneurial muscle that's being unlocked. And we come through the early 20th century into a modern world through two horrific world wars, and we end up in the middle of the 20th century with giants like Carl Jung, who talks about collective unconscious, but inside the even broader project of his work, which is intuiting the Aquarian age and the individuation project, side it, and right next to him, Maslow describing the idea of self-actualization, and later, towards the end of his life, self-transcendence. And that these are some of the framing narratives that shaped the 60s and the 70s and the 60-year run that we can recognize as the rise of postmodernity. And I told this quick story to bring us to today, in the context of today, because now there are two or three important features that become the context for our conversation today. The first being that because of the large-scale challenges and crises that we face, community may be even more important. The second, that because of that individuation and the unlocking of that potential, we now have the permission and the capability to join many, many more communities than ever before all over the planet, all over the world. And thirdly, most critical, that we now have the capacity and the permission and the potential to join communities as self-authored agents. No longer in the need to lose ourselves inside the community, but rather discover a way of being inside a community where the unlock of our own individual growth and maturation is jointly attended to, at least by potential, as we humans mature through the opportunity that's in front of us. And many of us, many people all around the planet, are sensing that this coming decade, or coming 2 or 3 decades, is about some phase of transition. And call it a transformation age, call it a release age, call it a transition, call it an elevation. Different people with different developmental frameworks anticipated and described this time in different language. We called this gathering today because we sense that community has a big and important part to play. And that's the reason to framing this one plot line out of the bigger story of the epochal progression. And with that, I would like to pause now and begin by inviting Grace Boda to offer some sparking thoughts. And Grace is a gifted coach and advisor, and consultant to leaders and to creatives. And she is especially gifted, in my experience with her, in the capacity to listen to what is arising in the greater system that we are exploring and to translate that. So thank you for joining us, Grace. Please, anything you'd like to offer at this point?
Yes, thank you. As I listen to your reflections on the evolution, Aviv, of the ways that we've engaged community and individuality, I'm struck by, as you were alluding to, the importance of this time, this big transition in how we engage communities. That in the recent past, we've engaged largely community as a way of finding belonging. You know, we hear ourselves and others say, oh, I found my people. I know where I belong because I'm with people who look like me or who talk like me, who believe what I do, who have opinions like mine, who have the same hobbies I do or work on the same project. They're like me, therefore I belong there, which by definition implies there's somewhere else I don't belong. And there are some who belong with me and some who don't belong with me. And the transition that I'm seeing that has me so lit up as the collective awakening rolls out, which I believe is in process, rolls out across us, all of us, I think what we're finding more and more is a way to be together such that I realize belonging doesn't even make sense. I belong everywhere. And therefore, if there's nowhere I don't belong, that no longer makes sense. And there's nobody who's not my people. That was grammatically awkward, but you know what I mean? But everyone is my people. So what emergent communities are for me is the enactment of the understanding, the dawning awakening, which is actually ancient, but dawning on some of us, that anyone can enter a room together. And if we enter with presence, and if we find our way to attuning and coherence with one another, we find that all of humanity is present in my heart. The way that we checked in with what's alive now were so deeply human observations and questions. And so as all of that comes forward, it doesn't matter who's elbow to elbow with me because we share it all and we become instruments together of what is deeply, wildly human. And we become representatives of life even beyond humanity, of the natural world. I know myself as all of life, and together we become the experiencers and the expressors of all of life, of all awareness. And so that's what emergent community is for me. And I think that's the transition that we're making, away from communities of egoic identity and toward communities as instruments of life more generally. And that is a tremendously healing and reconciling movement. So I offer that as an invitation to reflection about where anyone might see that happening in their own inner community of self or in their communities in the larger world. And what it means. There are both gifts and prices to pay in that. So I'll pause there.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me just follow on with what else would you say to what you're describing as that transition from being grounded or anchored with the egoic self and releasing or sensing into your greater potential? What other intelligence or wisdom about this transition that we are sensing in ourselves, but perhaps are not always able to hold to or sustain? What other guidance or intelligence can you offer to that inquiry?
I know we'll get a little later in our conversation to qualities and practices that help us get there, but I'll foreshadow that somewhat with, I think it isn't that one leads to another, like being able to be in these communities helps us awaken to our wholeness, or that awakening to our wholeness allows us to be in these communities, but that these things co-arise, they are emergent together. And so I see these emergent communities, the kind that are emerging and those that have the capacity to follow emergence, all your definitions of them, I see them as a signal and an indicator of a deeper movement in us that expresses itself in some capacities. For example, in order for me to participate within myself or with you or anyone in that kind of community, I must have the capacity to soothe my own ego, to soothe my personality drives. So this requires the resolution of trauma, collective and individual, that has been afoot lately. I must be able to cohere, to bring my mind and my heart into coherence, to bring my individuality into coherence with yours and with others. And so there's a wholeness making movement that happens as we participate in groups emergently, and there is a wholeness expressing movement. This kind of collective intelligence we're talking about is sometimes we call it field awareness. So I learned to listen beyond the words. I learned to listen beyond the thoughts, beyond my ego. I learned to be aware of the larger field of wisdom that is around and within and through us. And so I learned to stabilize my own. So this is individuality in service of the larger whole. So those are all movements that I see happening, that translate to practices and to qualities also of these kinds of groups.
Thank you. Thank you. So let us bring, please, Jeff to join us. And Jeff is highly gifted intuitive, intuiting the small and the large worlds in one-on-one interactions as he guides and advises people, and into the larger systems. And he has a unique gift and capacity to calibrate and sense what is, not just what is arising, what is exactly right at this point in time. And so, no pressure, Jeff, but with that, what would you want to offer, please?
Thank you, Aviv, for that perhaps overkind introduction. And I'm grateful to be here with everyone today or tonight or this morning. I was inspired earlier today to ask the question again, what is emergence? And I have been in this inquiry for a decade, ever since I met Stadler, whom you'll all hear from very soon. And I've been practicing emergence with various communities, and including recently with some of the people here. And I've been listening for the subtle dynamics and paying attention to the patterns. And over time, I've had various distillations. So I'll offer today's distillation. And so we can think of this as a work in progress, and other perspectives are certainly welcome. So what is emergence? And how is it relevant to community and the world situation? So this is what came to me, partly in meditation, partly as I sat and calibrated for the truth of what I will now share. May it serve. Emergence is the orchestration of the intelligence of life itself. In this orchestration, there is a co-arising of all things as networks of interdependence. There are feedback loops of perception and consciousness that inform the co-arising, and the deep intelligence of life is continuously making decisions that beings participate in through individual and collective choices. When there is coherence, not necessarily consensus, but coherence among these agents of aliveness, higher order possibilities can be made manifest through their receptivity and allowing. This is the essence of synergy. By listening together in the space of silence and unknowing, a community practicing emergence discovers that which is ready to come forth and can take steps that are in alignment with the creativity of life. By acting in conscious alignment with emergence and life, entire communities can enter states of higher creativity in which the regenerative and healing capacities of life itself are naturally accessed and expressed. Thus, communities practicing emergence hold vital keys to successfully responding to the complex challenges of these times, which call for new solutions from greater levels of consciousness in service to regeneration on a global scale. Recalling Einstein's famous insight that we cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them, such communities enable us to move to a new level of thinking or consciousness that can actually resolve the challenges we face collectively and as a species. So emergent communities in all flavors, spontaneous, intentional, aspirational, are potentially able to address climate change or plastic pollution in oceans, whatever wicked problem we can name, when we come together in a coherent way and listen from the deep space of the unknown, the previously unconsidered possibilities and maybe impossibilities come forth. And from a different level of consciousness, we actually have the ability to synthesize our various perspectives into a whole that is beyond the individual ego, ultimately beyond even the collective egos, which are in tension around the world. And we find that we are naturally harmonizing with life because we are life. And emergence is how life works. And even the individual self is emergent. All of the parts that we invited in, they come together, they synthesize into this wholeness. And so there are all levels of wholeness simultaneously resonating. And this invisible, orchestrating intelligence that we can call life, the one life and the many lives that we are, is behind it all. So emergence is a 21st century capacity, and it's a very ancient capacity. And thanks to the long arc of history and development, we now have the capacity to understand it and work with it in a skillful way. So synergy, emergence, we have the technology. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff. So let us please, with this, bring Anne Stadler. And Anne is a pioneering elder who has been a source of inspiration to many of us by practicing and modeling and demonstrating to us many of those very things we talk about in small and in large ways. And it's great to have you here. It's a privilege and an honor that you are with us. What would you want to offer at this point, please?
Shyness is part of what I'm offering at this very moment. It feels like I am in the midst of very great minds and articulate human beings who really focus our attention on the absolutely key sparks that we need to be paying attention to. And I notice when I am in that situation of speaking by myself, that I get very shy to begin with. But I'm really here to serve my own evolution and the evolution of the planet, the cosmos, of life. And what I want us to focus on is the fact that we have it all. And we've expressed this, each of you, in your offerings up till this moment, we have the inner community that is operating all the time within us, whether we are conscious of that or whether we are not. It's always sensing, choosing, present in our response and presence in the world. We have also our connection, as you've expressed, Aviv and everyone else has, to communities that are happening all the time to us, whether it's contacting the fellows that came and washed my windows today, and with whom I had a very wonderful heart-to-heart, or whether it is the aspirational, deliberate communities, or the other kinds of spontaneous communities. So I pay attention, and I encourage us as we are gathered here and in our daily lives, first of all, to what's happening inside my inner community. Because I am community. So whatever it is I offer in a setting like this, I am not an individual. I am offering from a community within me that is activated by you all and by the field, by the undercurrent of life that is moving us all to purpose. One of you said, why are we here? It's purpose that is why we're here. And we only know a little bit about that purpose because mostly we are unconscious of that. But our inner community is operating in behalf of that. So whatever it is I have to offer, it's very important that I follow my inner process and notice. Oh, I need to speak now. And I can feel it when that happens. There's a way inside me that I almost feel I'm doing it to amplify the feeling, but it is somewhere in my butt that I kind of want to get in there. And it's hard for me sometimes to resist that. But it doesn't matter if when I speak, if I'm on the money completely and contributing coherence to coherence for all of us, because the larger community that I'm part of is going to ignore me if I'm not contributing. It'll ignore me. And I'll have to, sort of make my point more, vigorously until I get the clue or shut up and start listening again inside me that, for the right timing, for the opportunity where we are in harmonic resonance. I love the fact that you include music to help us be in harmonic resonance in the way that we come together. That resonance exists in me and in all of us when the sense of coherence and the rightness of the offering contributes to the evolution of the community. And actually, I am wondering if life itself and emergence, as you express it, Jeff, isn't simply the evolution of the signals that we are always receiving and transmitting. so that the better we become at noticing the signals and amplifying them, the better we are at contributing to nurturing ourselves and nurturing the emergent community that is forming around us. I would challenge you, Grace, about belonging, because I believe we all want to belong. What we want to belong to is wholeness, the all of it. The people we don't understand, the people we do understand, the people who are doing things that are outside of our primary frame of reference. And so my sense would be that the more we can follow our own signals and the signals of others that are wanting to be noticed, the better we are at transcending ego and letting ego serve the whole. There's nothing wrong with ego. It just doesn't serve the whole when it separates us. So, and I guess the other thing that I would say as a spark is when we are unconscious of the signals and the process that we are involved in our inner community, we can do terrible, terrible havoc and damage, because there are so many places, the unhealed places, the trauma places that we're hiding from, the fears that we've lived with, that we then act out and project on others without even meaning to. And one of the things that Jung said that I think is incredibly important, Carl Jung and Arnold Mindell, who has developed process psychology from Jung's teachings to some extent. One of the things they say is it's essential to become conscious of the unconsciousness within us that signals something is trying to happen. So if we are serving life and serving the planet and serving wholeness, then it is incumbent upon us, as we nurture the emergent community and the emergent community, to really practice becoming conscious of these unconscious impulses that one of you spoke about. I think it was John or Jerry. I wrote that down. I didn't write down your name, but you asked the question, how do we move from the unconscious to conscious? Well, one way we move is paying attention to the signals that are within us, following them, amplifying them, and offering them to whatever community outside of ourselves we're part of. Okay, anyways, I'm hoping that this contributed, but
Wonderful. Thank you.
But
Wonderful.
I would like us to be practicing this as we listen to each other. I would very much like that. Hello, Ru.
Which is the most beautiful segue we needed, because we're about to transition to practice this and more in rooms. Lisa is preparing for us the rooms as we speak. Let me just bring, it's a starter location. Not that you need this prompt, but in case it helps anybody, sometimes people love to go with a question. What is it we're supposed to be speaking about? Well, we're supposed to be speaking about all that we just sense into now, and what we've heard from Anne and Jeff and Grace, and also reflect on your best experiences in communities when and where individuals are liberated to discover themselves and the communal space grows with meaning and potential. And we are inquiring about those qualities and practices that enable that kind of arising. So we'll take here a moment, brief moment of silence for each one of us to just get grounded in the inquiry. And you'll find yourself in 40 seconds parachuted to another room for, we'll see by time, probably 18 minutes.